So we've kind of gone through and done introductions, so I'll skip that part of this. Obviously, this workshop is focused on market research. We're going to be talking in terms of primary and secondary, and also qualitative and quantitative. So the idea here is to give you an overview of the way that we look at this, and then to provide you with some thoughts in terms of, tools and approaches, methodologies, and that sort of thing. But as always, we're here to answer questions that you might have after the fact as well, things that may come up after you've had the chance to think about what we talk about over the course of the next 90 minutes or so. So kind of already talked about this, so I won't be redundant here. But I did want to talk about the objectives before we get too far in. So, market research is really all about accommodating for the normal risk of business. And so it's about exploring the topics that we may not have all the information on that we need. And so the first objective is to determine what we need to apply the market research to. So, what are the needs that we have? What don't we know versus what we do know, or what do we need to fill in some blanks around? And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about primary and secondary research both. In addition to their purposes. Primary research, just as an FYI, is the research that we do, that would be specific to a company, a set of things that we need to go find out, whereas secondary research is more focused on research that's already out there. But what I'll say here before we jump into the specifics is that both are very important. There's not one that's better or more valuable than the other. And so we'll cover all of that in detail as well. Qualitative versus quantitative. Qualitative is more discussion based and it provides direction. Quantitative is more numbers based, and it allows things like statistical analysis and that type of thing. So we'll be talking about that in some depth as well. Then we are going to jump into the exercises. I think we have 5 exercises lined up. And the idea would be to take what we learn in the first part of this workshop and then start to apply it. So we're going to have you construct a qualitative screener, which is sort of all about who we want to talk with, as well as a quantitative survey. And so we'll talk about some of those questions as well. So like all of our workshops, this will be pretty interactive. What I would say is that if you have questions as we go, let us know, and feel free to interrupt. I can't, at the moment, I can't actually see anyone. I can only see my own screen. So, feel free to just interrupt and say, hey, I've got a question about that, and we'll pause and answer whatever questions you might have. We want to make this as discussion oriented as possible, so don't hesitate there. All right, so as I mentioned a minute ago, then, market research is really all about reducing or mitigating the risks that normally exist with business. So, this could be risk around, how the market is evolving and trying to understand that and how the organization will adapt, or it could be trying to define a new market or a new product category and the risk associated with that. It's also meant to reduce risk as it relates to spending money on things that are never going to provide any kind of a return. So, for example, you might be thinking about some sort of a marketing campaign, and you've got your message, and you start doing these mass email campaigns. But if it turns out that the research wasn't done, and we don't really understand the message or the message that's going to resonate, and we don't really even understand, who we should be sending that message to, then, the efforts and the dollars spent may not be as well applied as they could be. So, risk is really the primary motivation for market research. It's really to identify the things that we don't know, or that we think we know, but we're not really sure about, so that we can make good decisions as we go forward. And that applies to the product, the price, the channel, the promotion. It's really all 4 Ps of marketing that this applies to. And so a lot of the things that we talk about sort of introduce the concept of, hey, let's do market research when we need it. It's not necessarily, at one point in time during a new product commercialization process, for example. It may be that you do some initial market research and then you have more questions that come up along the way. And so it's time to do a little bit more. But the goal of this workshop is to help you understand all of that and to understand that, doing market research doesn't have to be a massive, expensive project. There's a lot that can be done in-house. And then, there are some cases where it makes sense to hire somebody like Chad or me, to do that, maybe because you want to have it be blinded or, something along those lines. All right, so I love this example, and at the same time, it dates me. So I'm going to take a risk here and share an example of where things have gone wrong from a marketing perspective. And I'm going to go back to my teenage years. So when I was a teenager, when I was in high school of driving age, this car, and I'm not going to name names, but you probably all know what it is, was pretty popular. And it was popular because it was, at least by the standards during the 80s, it was considered to be sporty and, easily modified. Basically it served the purpose of a kid that was maybe 16 or, 17 or 18 years old. If they wanted to do things to it to make it more sporty, they had that capability. It was pretty easy to work on and that type of thing. The challenge was that this particular car wasn't engineered particularly well. And so it had a tendency when it was hit from the rear in an accident type scenario to have the gas tank, if not explode, at least catch on fire. And that was because of the location of the gas tank. And so you could say, well, it wasn't really designed particularly well. And, whether this is true or not, I'm going to use this as an example to highlight the point that I'm trying to make. So if you assume that, the company that produced this car did some research and they did it with, 16 to 18 or maybe 16 to 20-year-old males, those that are just learning to drive and care about things like the aesthetics of their sporty looking car and that sort of thing. If they only did that, you could say, well, then they designed exactly what that age group, that demographic was looking for, and they should have had wild success. But there are other stakeholders in, the purchase of a car when you think about this. So, 16-year-old boys have parents, right? And when parents hear about things like, hey, it's a really poor design that has a tendency to be really dangerous when and if the car is in an accident. By the way, my driver is 16 years old, and it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when they have an accident. I really don't want them driving a car that has the potential to have an exploding gas tank. So, you could argue that if that scenario was really what happened, that the market research should have been done not just with the 16-year-old male, but also with the parents of that 16-year-old male, to make sure that, it met their requirements as well. So it's kind of a silly example, but I thought it was a good way to highlight the importance of making sure that when you're talking about who, you need to be talking with, it's not just the person that's going to drive the vehicle in this case, but it's also the person that's going to influence that purchase. You need to make sure that you're meeting the needs of both personas. And a good way to do that is with market research and segmentation and building out, personalities or personas so that you know exactly who you're talking to, how to reach them, what to say once you get there. And so that, the purchase process winds up being a lot smoother than what would otherwise be the case, using, this particular vehicle as an example of that. Any questions so far or any comments so far? Would anyone buy this vehicle for their teenage driver? Knowing what you now know. All right, let's continue on. So, there are lots of reasons that businesses fail, but in my 35 plus years, my observation has been pretty well aligned, I think, with our list here. So, I know we have some product marketers and product managers, or at least folks on this workshop call, that have had experiences, kind of with and beside those types of disciplines. And it's pretty easy to go down the path as a company of getting excited about something. Hey, this is a great idea. And everybody inside of the company, agrees that this makes sense. Let's go do it. I've had a lot of clients that have said that. In fact, one that I'm working with currently that as recently as a week ago said, I think we can skip the market research. Let's just go do this. And it's, I think it's human nature to sort of jump into action and maybe skip some of the steps. The problem with that is that, it tends to lead to an outcome that nobody wants. And you may not figure this out for a couple of years, but, not satisfying a need or having a bad or no business plan at all. Maybe you made a bunch of assumptions that were way off, but you didn't validate them with some research to know that they were at least in the ballpark. Could be that you've got a lack of financing, which may or may not have to do with market research. But, it's things like this and bad location, inflexibility in terms of the business model, rapid expansion when you're not really ready for it. The market evolves and you don't know it because you haven't been paying attention. This is a big one, assuming the needs of a few are the needs of many. So, I talk a lot about the difference between the strategy around a qualitative approach and a quantitative approach. And Chad's going to go into some detail here in a minute. But, with a qualitative approach, it gives you good insight and context, and it gives you direction, but it is not a representative sample of the market. It's just not a big enough pool of people that you typically talk with. And so, it's important that before you make big decisions about things like needs and requirements and pricing and all of that sort of thing, that you've talked with enough people to know that your sample is representative from a statistical standpoint with the population as a whole. Otherwise, you wind up talking with a segment of the population. You might be able to meet their needs, but the market winds up being way smaller than what you thought it might be. Another area would be product design that's done by internal biases only. So I think we've all been in that experience where the engineers have come up with what they think makes sense, but it's not been vetted with the market. I was once involved with a product. It was a software product. This was years ago, and I won't name the company, but we went and we talked to what we thought was going to be one of our big customers, and we spent the entire day with them. We showed them the product, and we talked about what it could do and how it could benefit them and all of this sort of thing. And at the end of the day, and this was a creative group, and we had developed a product that was for creative endeavors, so for putting together, graphics and that type of thing. And one of the, I think it was the creative director at this company, at the end of the day said, "Mike, I have to be honest." He said, "This product, while the functionality is good, looks and feels like a product that was designed by engineers for engineers." And that stuck with me. That was a conversation that I probably had 20 years ago, but it stuck with me because it made me realize, or maybe it reinforced what I already knew about making sure that you get out and you talk with people that are actually going to buy and use the product. Because if you rely solely on the internal view, you're going to miss big things. And in that case, we miss pretty big as well. Pricing model doesn't match up with customers' view of the values. So we talk a lot about price sensitivity and, where they see the value versus where the company might think the value is. We just need to make sure that we're aligned there. And then, go to where where the potential customers want to actually buy. So if you're talking about a consumer product and, they prefer to shop at Home Depot and you don't have your product available at Home Depot, it's at Lowe's instead, or it's only available on Amazon or whatever the case may be. You have to understand where they want to buy and then make sure that your products are available there. Otherwise, they're just simply going to choose a competitive product because they're probably, unless you built a huge amount of demand for your product, they're probably going to buy whatever's on the shelf. So, the whole idea here is that market research could and should be used to inform all of the above. And again, what we're trying to do here is to reduce the risk of business. And these are just some examples of what can go awry when it's not put into place in the way that it should be. All right. So, I sort of alluded to this earlier, and I've even got a white paper that is, in fact, I think we sent that to you last week, that's called Start with Research. And so it's a little bit of a confusing name, perhaps, as we're talking about this, in that it's not to say that you only do research up front. It's meant to say that you start with research and then you insert research whenever you have questions that need to be answered, but that you hadn't thought about when you did the first round of research. So the reason the arrows are the way they are is because, yes, start with research to understand market opportunity, size of the market requirements, product requirements, and that sort of thing. But then use it as you go, as other questions come up as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty focused on market research, strategic planning, and commercial execution. And I can tell you that in my experience, both recently and over the long term, the need for this, comes up on a regular basis, just regardless of whichever phase you happen to be in. And it's things like customer satisfaction, unmet needs, market requirements, some of the things that I mentioned a minute ago. But it's also for things like segmentation. So really understanding, what are the buyer segments? What are their demographics? What are their psychographics? How do I appeal to them with a message that they will understand and appreciate? And then how do I reach them? Do they, are they on social media? Do they respond to email campaigns? Do they respond to Google ads? Do they still read magazines, that are special interest? I mean, whatever that mechanism is, we need to understand it so that we can place our messaging there so that they'll see it. Otherwise, you wind up spending a lot of money and effort on marketing that never goes anywhere because it never actually gets to the person that you intend for it to get to. Any questions so far? All right, with that, I will hand over to Chad.
Great, thanks, Mike. So we're about to get into our first interactive exercise. I see people on the Miro board, which is great, but we quickly want to share sort of a typical process flow for market research projects. Maybe some of you are familiar with this, but we just want to get on the same page. These steps would exist whether it's you and your internal team at the business doing the research, or you're partnering with like a market research firm. So these are pretty typical steps. It starts with defining the scope of the research. You need to know what you're going out to get answers for. So you want to clearly outline specific business questions that you're aiming to answer, defining the problem that you're looking to solve or the opportunity that you're testing. And you also want to kind of understand, okay, if we do this research, what will we know and what decisions will we be able to make, right? So you're really also thinking about the end in mind. The next step then is figuring out who you want to talk to or who you want to survey, those target personas. You want to understand the ideal customer profiles, and you want to get pretty specific too, in terms of their demographics, their roles, their industry that they're working in, buying behaviors, pain points. So getting pretty specific is important when you're thinking about target personas. The third step is to develop a discussion guide if you're doing interviews or a focus group, or the questionnaire for a survey. This is what we're going to cover the most in today's workshop. And this step entails creating, a structured yet flexible guide or a list of questions. And there's art and science to all of this, and we'll get into that as we go through the workshop. The next step is recruiting participants. And for those of you who have done this, like Mike and I, you probably know that this can be a challenging task. We won't actually cover this too much today. But just know that recruiting involves reaching out to participants through a variety of means, email, phone, LinkedIn, social media. You may have to hire a third party that already has people who have opted in to conduct or to be part of market research. So even if you're talking or trying to talk to your customers, that can be a challenge, I've found, just because getting access to them and trying to get them to commit to the time. Those things can be challenging. So recruitment's a whole other topic that we won't cover today, but certainly happy to talk about it, after the workshop. After recruitment comes conducting the interviews and administering the survey. That's pretty self-explanatory. But again, there's art and science to that, particularly when you're in the moment of a focus group or an interview, or exactly how you craft questions for a survey. We'll kind of touch on that today, but again, there's a lot of detail we could go into, and we can take that offline or send you some materials that we've written up on that subject. And then the last step is to analyze the data that you collected and report the results. You need to share the information that you collected with those who are interested. The analysis part, for example, if you did some interviews, you're probably going to have those transcribed, or you should have them transcribed. You're going to analyze all those transcriptions, and you're going to try to identify key themes and patterns and insights. And then, from the reporting standpoint, you want to be able to present it in a clear way and make it actionable. Often you're going to, actually write out some quotes from the interviews or have key visuals like charts and graphs from a survey. Again, we'll touch on this a little bit today, and we've got examples of reports that we could certainly share with people. But again, we wanted to review this process as I think it's good context to have as we start to work through some of these group exercises and the case study. So before we get into that first exercise, any questions about the process or anything we've talked about so far?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Let's go. So over to the Miro board. I have two screens up here, so I have to look to my right to get to the Miro board. I see other people in here. So the case study, this was a startup company, MedTech Innovations. They've got this great idea for a wearable that can monitor different vital signs. And, they're thinking about preventative healthcare. So targeting, people that have chronic health conditions, also maybe people who are just really health conscious, right? So as the case study said, they did some initial market research with customers, with healthcare providers, helped refine their strategy a little bit in terms of pricing and what sort of features they want to focus on the most, how they'll sort of think about working with healthcare providers. But there's a lot of unknowns still based on where the company is and how the case study was written. So what we wanted to brainstorm now and get people's thoughts around is just really the high level question, what don't we know? Right? So what are some things we don't know? Let's not think about research just yet per se, but let's think about things we don't know. So I would love for anybody to just raise their hand and, start riffing on this, or go into the Miro board and create some sticky notes. So if you haven't used Miro before, there's are you sharing this screen, Mike?
Can you show no, but how let me do that.
Maybe it's pretty self-explanatory. There's a toolbar on the left. There's a little sticky note or a big letter T for a text box. But if you go in and you start typing a sticky note or you drag a sticky note over, this is what I'd like to do, is just spend like a minute or two, everybody typing a few things about what we don't know, what's not in the case study, and add some sticky notes under this heading, what don't we know? And then we're just going to talk about it a little bit and see what we think might be most important.
Yep. And Chad, I've got some ideas here as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and participate from that standpoint. And what I would say is, don't look at what other people are writing. Just do like a flow of consciousness here. Come up with as many stickies as you can, and then it's fine if we have redundancy. That's not an issue at all.
Great. Yep. Keep going, everybody. If anybody's having trouble with Miro, let us know. This is great. So I'm just starting to move things around into groups, but everybody should just keep kind of riffing on this. Of course, if you don't like where I moved one of yours, feel free to move it.
Move it back.
We'll have a little mural fight. All right, like we'll get one more up on the board here. I see Mike typing one, Julius typing one.
All right, I can be done.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we could go on for minutes with this, I'm sure, because we've got a lot of smart people here who think about these go-to-market challenges all the time. So let me just zoom out here personally so I can see everything. I kind of zoomed in. So this is a good start, right? We've got some kind of distribution, how to reach customers, messaging, maybe that goes with that. Customer segments, so who will actually buy, customer segments, personas and use cases, product market fit, wanted features by segment. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are great. So some of these are based on, they're very customer based. So even though the first round of research MedTech Innovations did was, customer based, they did a, focus group and a survey, we still have questions about this, it sounds like. Does anybody want to dive a little deeper into that? Like, what questions might we have about customers still?
Maybe just have one or two of you kind of give us a quick summary
Yeah,
of some of the things that you were thinking about.
I'll cold call somebody if nobody starts talking.
I'll jump in. I would say my experiences as a general rule, there's nothing like live customers in the market tell you how wrong you are in a conference room. So research is a stepping stone towards that, and making assumptions about your customers, whether it's one type of customers or multiple types of customers that have different needs. I think that's a really good thing to call out because it helps you to kind of focus your investment. I cheated and I added one more thing, which was language market fit around the where to advertise and promote. And this is a great way to save yourself a ton of marketing headache by understanding that you're talking about the product and what the customer need is in their words, not yours.
Yeah.
Because that'll save you a ton of things down the road. And market research is a great way to shine a light on that early in the process.
That is such a great point, Julius.
What about competitive? There was one sticky out here around competitive. Who wrote that one down?
I wrote the competitive analysis sticky. It's just in the case study, I didn't see a lot of information about, any kind of competitive analysis that was done. Is there other products in the market that are similar? And then how are those products doing? Who are they geared towards? What personas, use cases are they, and is that successful? Is there room in the market for another competitor? I just didn't see a lot about, similar products in the market.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one, Andy. Yeah, this case study might have been pretty hot and fresh like 10 years ago, but now there's a lot of wearables. But still, I think it's helpful to have a case study where we kind of understand the actual product itself. So that's totally true. Like, they haven't done a lot of competitive analysis.
It might help them narrow their target market too, is like understanding what the competition is doing and how they're doing. Maybe there's a niche that's not being served that, they're trying to go after, or.
Mm-hmm. One thing that, I put the retailer appetite, and this is kind of fits in with all this, channels, distribution, how do we reach prospects? Again, this startup, of course, didn't say whether any of them had retail experience. Maybe they did, but that's a big unknown, right? Like, how is this actually going to get into a consumer's hands? I mean, putting it on our own website and trying to do word of mouth and going to trade shows or whatnot. But I think there's clearly a need to figure out distribution overall, whether it's through brick and mortar, e-com, or even wholesalers or distributors who handle that, right? Maybe they need to get in with a distributor before they can even talk to a retailer. The distributors maybe control the value chain. So just a lot of unknowns there, I thought.
Yep.
Any other comments on anything else out here? This has been, I think, a good start to our exercises. I want to move on to the next one soon here in the interest of pace. So yeah, if you just move, you probably have seen like all of these questions and these exercises on the Miro board. You just move to the right. We have exercise 2, and that's the question of who do we need to talk to? Again, this goes back to that step in the process we went through, which is, who do we want to talk to? Who are we going to have to try to recruit? So let's spend another couple minutes here, all putting our ideas into sticky notes, whether it's, for one of the clusters around distribution, whether it's the cluster around customers, whether it's the cluster kind of around product market fit, features, competitive, whatnot. So let's just riff on this a little bit. Everybody spend some time typing some sticky notes. Give us a little more room here. Excellent. This is so fun to see everybody brainstorming. And that some of these I had not thought of myself. So this is really great.
The power of many.
Right. No, yeah. All right, let's dig into some of these here. I don't know why okay, sorry. I just had a screen issue. So we have some cluster around retailers and online sellers, your existing customers or somebody else's. That's a good one. Jake, sorry to pick on you. You want to share one of the people you thought needed to be talked to and give us some thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah, I think health systems and vendors. I mean, this one's a particular pain point just because it moves very slow. There's a lot of regulatory issues with it, but also a lot of the vendors can't communicate. So I was kind of thinking, I sort of combined the data engineers and the health system vendors are two critical groups that you need to talk to kind of understand what the landscape looks like.
Makes a ton of sense. I like this one, medical device SMEs. I mean, I like them all, but and I'm not sure who wrote that one, but I'm just curious what
So the idea,
yeah.
sorry, Chad. The idea behind that one is, you really want to make sure that you're talking to people that have already gone through the whole process of getting a medical device into the market, the certifications and all the
Sure.
sort of issues with that. And then also, what works, where's the gaps?
Yep. Great point. Yeah, when I read the case study, I wasn't thinking it would be a medical device, but now that you just write that down, that makes a lot of sense. That's not a space I know a lot about, but makes a lot of sense that you might need to clear that if it's going to be counted as a medical device by capturing things like blood pressure and heart rate and things like that.
Yeah, it likely falls into the category of class 2 on the medical device side. And
Right.
if it's transmitting the data somewhere over Bluetooth or, wireless or whatever it may be, or Wi-Fi rather, there's probably also going to be a component of HIPAA compliance that will need to be dealt with. So, there are, anytime you're talking about, things that are in a regulated industry, it gets more complicated, but boy, it's sure nice to know about that sooner than later, right? Rather than being surprised,
Yeah,
when
and
it's too late.
we've run into this. So we do a lot of wearables, and we've run into this issue because it was not classified as a medical device, and then it became classified as a medical device. And that was one of the things that we wish we knew ahead of time.
Yeah,
For sure.
So there's a pretty good cluster around here around just talking to more users, patients, 80% ICP and 20% the opposite. If whoever wrote that, I'd love to understand that. Sorry, I'm kind of driving this here. If other people want to get into one of them, I'll let you talk next. But
Yeah, that was me,
80%
Chad.
ICP. Okay.
So look, I mean, I think the approach that I've always taken to market research is part of it is about validating your assumptions, but another part of it is about discovering your blind spots.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
at the end of the day, whoever buys the product is correct. And whatever we designed in the conference room is just whatever that was at an earlier stage. And I'd like to narrow the cone of uncertainty around the target market, but I'd also like to identify as early as possible if there's an untapped area where, so sometimes product market fit and language market fit, the market is telling you, and you just need to listen.
Yeah.
And so exploring a new audience is a great way to discover that.
Julius, you just made a comment that I think is really critical and sometimes missed, which is, the market is telling you what they want or what the requirements are, and you have to listen. Sometimes what I've seen happen is we have an idea, we're hard set that this is the right idea. We go out and do a little bit of validation, and sometimes the customer even tells us that, no, that's not exactly what I want, but we ignore it because we're down a path and we think it's the right path, even though somebody's telling us that it's not. That's a really critical nuance that I think, people should be aware of. Sounds counterintuitive to not take their advice and do what they're telling you, but I've seen it happen more than once.
Yeah, fantastic. Anybody else have a question or want to drill down into something they wrote, something that they feel the group needs to consider as we move forward? All right.
The only thing that I would add, and I'm the one that wrote the broadest audience you can get efficiently, is that I've also seen scenarios where you're trying to identify the perfect audience to go and reach, and you just take too damn long.
Yep.
Just get it out there in the market, start getting data in, and then start refining from there. You can take the similar MVP strategy of product and apply it to market research just by starting by fielding a couple of surveys out there, refining your stuff, and then putting your big investment of time and dollars into that as you go.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. Mike, can you switch over to the slides real quick? I just
You
want
should,
to
yeah, they should be up.
Okay, great. I just want to cover a couple things. I feel like everybody kind of knows this stuff, so I won't take very much time on this. I want to get right to the next exercise. But again, we just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Qualitative versus quantitative, sort of the two key types of research. Qualitative is sort of understanding underlying reasons and motivations of people, focus group, interviews. Again, you're looking to initially understand some trends and a direction. Then quantitative is getting deeper, going for a much richer data set. Like a qualitative study could be 10, 50, maybe 80, 100 people, depending on how much your budget is. But quantitative tends to get much larger sample sizes because you're able to reach more people through, say, a survey. But these are just the two key methods. Again, I think we're all familiar with. And then the next slide just speaks to oh shoot, did I got these in reverse order?
That's all right. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm switching screens and I didn't see that. So
No
you want to go
problem.
back to primary and secondary? Sorry, I screwed that up. But again, primary and secondary, again, we definitely covered this. Like primary is where you're doing, or a research firm is doing very proprietary, bespoke research on your behalf. Secondary is looking at materials that somebody else has already done.
Yep.
So let's just move on to the third exercise, which I think, Mike, you were maybe going to start us off on that one, right?
Yeah, so let me just stop sharing and switch screens here again. We'll go back to the Miro board. So let's see. Okay, there we are. So yeah, if you just advance to the right, then the third question is there. So as we think about a qualitative study, so again, this is the discussion, could be one-on-one discussions or a focus group discussion where you've got a structured discussion guide. What are the questions that we would want to include there? And we'll take a few minutes to have everybody brainstorm a little bit, and then we'll discuss like we have with the previous two exercises.
Sorry, I made my stickies bigger. They're harder to drag. I forgot that you can zoom in on Miro, then you can see the smaller text.
All right, I'm just doing a little bit of organizing here. And what I am finding, okay, so what I've done here is organize some clusters, and what I found, actually this one belongs down here, I think, is that, you know, there's a cluster around the product itself and the features. There's a cluster down below around the current pain points, the need, if you will. There's a cluster around the value proposition in terms of, you know, how they would talk about this. There's one posted here on where they would expect to see advertisements and that sort of thing. So where to place ads, if you will, where to you know, talk about the messages that do resonate. There's at least one posted on competition. And then there's one on price. So if you think about this, we've kind of hit all of the 4 Ps. We've hit the product, we've hit the competition for that product, we've hit the price, we've hit the channel, and then with the promotion P, we've hit message and then where to advertise. So I think this is a pretty complete list. And so, you know, in a qualitative study, you know, you would take these concepts and then start to build out a discussion guide, right? With one section of the guide sort of representing all of these areas and others that you may come up with once you start to draft the guide itself, and then all the follow-up questions that would normally go along with that. And you guys have all probably developed discussion guides in the past, but this is a really good way to do it. Get a group of people together, talk about what we don't know and what we need to ask, and then organize it into the form of a discussion guide that the moderators, you know, that are doing the interviews or moderating the focus group will use to get through the discussion. Any other thoughts here or questions or anecdotes that people want to share?
I think one thing I'll add, Mike, is this was like you said, great brainstorming, great ideas. The discussion guide then takes it to another level where you're really thoughtful about how you ask the questions and also the sequence.
Yep.
So we're not getting into that so much here. But, you know, some of the questions that I wrote, I was already thinking in terms of an actual discussion guide question, which typically are open-ended. Like using the words how or why or describe the scenario of. So I think, but again, I just wanted to add that point because there's, again, like that art and science of the discussion guide or the survey, some of those nuances about how you write the question and therefore how it's going to be phrased when they're in the focus group or interview, I think makes a difference.
Yep. And one thing that along those same lines, one point to be really paying attention to is that you write the questions in a way that aren't biased, that, you know, that isn't biased. So you don't want to, you know, presuppose an answer or try to sell somebody something during a discussion like this. You're trying to get, you know, back to the earlier point that I think Julius made. You're trying to get their, you know, their true feedback on what their need is and what they want to solve that need. You don't want them to be biased by, your preference for, for a particular product path or what have you. And this is where sometimes it makes sense to have a firm like Chad's or mine do the work, because we can keep the bias out of it, because we're not necessarily emotionally attached to whatever the internal strategy might be. And that's one of the reasons that that companies choose market research firms versus doing it internally, not to mention bandwidth and expertise and that sort of thing also. Okay, if there's nothing, I guess the other point that I would make with the discussion guide, and I do have examples, and I'm sure Chad does as well, of discussion guides that that I can provide. In fact, I was planning to send out after this workshop an example report of findings, and within that, it's got a discussion guide as one of the appendices. So I'll send that out after we're done today, and then you guys can kind of look through the materials just to get a better feel for what this typically looks like. The other thing that I was going to say is that the time associated with this discussion is also really important. So as you're building out the discussion guide itself, make sure you're allocating, the right amount of time to get through each of the sections, because when you ask people to commit to a focus group or to a one-on-one discussion, you might say, hey, I need you for an hour. You don't want to go over that amount of time, because, in some cases you're paying them by the hour, or in other cases they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, and you don't want to take advantage of the time that they've given you. So we always include time frames for each of the sections as well. Okay, if there aren't any other comments or questions, I am going to go back to the deck, and we've got a couple of concepts to cover here, and then we'll jump into the last couple of exercises. All right, so I wanted to just need to go into presentation mode here. You can see my screen, okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about quantitative, and this is a made-up example, but and by the way, this is in the white paper to a large extent. But I wanted to talk about some of what you can do once you have quantitative data. So in our story here today, we've done our qualitative, we've gotten the direction that allowed us to form an opinion of things that we want to try to quantify. So we've designed the survey, we've put it out online, we've gotten our feedback. Maybe we had 1,000 responses or something along those lines. Maybe it was a national study that we wanted to have a representative sample for. So you would typically do 1,000 to 2,000 if it's a national study. But let's just assume that all that happened and we started to get back the data. We started to analyze the data, and we're starting to draw conclusions. So in this case, we're looking at kind of the first level analysis, and we're saying, okay, in this case, we're selling a widget, could be the product that we just talked about in the case study, or something else. But we want to understand, a little bit about price. So we've explained it to them, they've seen what the value proposition is, key features and all of that. And now we want to see, how they would react to a price of $100. Let's just say that was our target price based on what we thought the market would bear, what the competition is doing, what our internal finance folks told us we need to get for this to achieve the right gross margin, et cetera. We want to know how likely is it that they're going to buy. So one of the questions that we asked was that, and the feedback that we got, or the data that we got back was this. So in this case, 85% of those we surveyed are likely or very likely to buy at $100. So you might say, okay, that's great information, but let's take it down another level of detail. So the second level analysis is, okay, let's take a cut of all the people that said that they would buy at $100, and let's understand what their most important feature is, right? And it turned out that when we did that, so if we had 2,000 respondents and we took 85% of that, then we've got 1,700 responses that we've cut, right? So we're looking at those responses only, and of those, we want to know, where do they put the most value? And in this case, it turned out to be customer support, which makes sense. It's a technical product, right? In the case of our case study, maybe they just, they want to be sure that when they set it up, they've got the support that they need to be able to use it as it's intended. So 80% have said that that's the most important thing, and that's, again, nationally, right? So we took everybody from every state, and we said, for those that said $100 seemed reasonable, what's the most important feature, if you will? Customer support is what 80% said. So then maybe we say, okay, so of those who are comfortable with the $100 price tag and they live in the Northeast, what does it look like? Because we want to start to understand if there are differences by region, and just follow along with my example here. But let's just say that during our qualitative work, when we talked with people from the Northeast, they were pretty vocal about customer support was the biggest thing. And so now we're looking at the data from across the nation, and we're saying, okay, well, of those people in the Northeast, 90% of them who were willing to pay $100 said that customer support was kind of their biggest deal. And again, back to the national data, that number was 80%. So what we want to know is, okay, is it more important from a statistical standpoint to be talking about customer support, in the Northeast? Do we need to put more emphasis on that there, or from a statistical standpoint, is it really the same as, the rest of the nation? So, there are dozens of statistical tools that we can use that you're probably all familiar with that will start to answer questions like this. But what I want to know is, for this first step, does living in the Northeast, so we'll call that X1, mean a statistically higher likelihood of valuing customer support? We'll call that Y, versus the rest of the US. We'll call that X2. And we can run correlation between those and try to see if it's telling us anything. But to really get to the answer that we're looking for, we need to run something called a t-test. And a t-test is going to tell us if the population of the Northeast is statistically different as it relates to this question versus the population as a whole across the nation. And not to jump into all the details here, but we ran the t-test. We came up with a negative 0.61 value. The t-test would say that it's significant if it's higher or equal to 1.995. In this case, it's not. And so statistically, we can say that there's no difference between the Northeast and the rest of the country as it relates to placing importance on customer support. And that would just be one of 1,000 different stats that we could run, once we have quantitative data. But I pointed out because it's kind of an easy example to follow along with. And so what that would translate to is this. So we would say, okay, what does all this mean for this particular feature, for this particular analysis? It means that the data is telling us that 85% of research participants are likely or very likely to purchase at a $100 price tag. And so we should probably price our product around $100 because we know we're going to get the bulk of the market by doing so. And then for those that are likely to purchase at that price, we know that 80% ranked customer support is most important. So, a focus, not the only focus, but a focus of the message needs to be on customer support so that we know that we're resonating with the market that's likely to buy at that price point. And then lastly, given the fact that we just did the t-test, we know that living in the Northeast does not significantly impact whether prospective buyers value customer support. They all think that's a valuable part of our value proposition. So it means that we don't want to put more or less emphasis on customer support in the Northeast versus the rest of the U.S. So, just one of many examples that we could have used to sort of highlight the point that by having quantitative data and then analyzing it statistically, you can learn things that you would have never been able to come up with, in the qualitative portion of what we're talking about. You would have heard themes there, and you would have gotten, direction, but it's the quantitative market research that really enables you to fine tune what it is your approach is going to be, whether it be the product itself, the price, how you talk about it, where you distribute the product. All of those types of things could be found in the data once you have a survey design that, gets to all the questions that you have, and then the ability to analyze things statistically to draw conclusions that are more inferential. Any questions about this? I know we covered it fast and it was a lot to talk about, but this is a pretty good example of what can be done with the data once it's actually in. Have you guys had experience with this level of analysis? Have you guys done this sort of thing in the past, or seen it done at companies that you've been with over your career? Or is this pretty new?
This is Julius. I mean, we've certainly sought to build price elasticity curves for products across different customer segments before going to a go-to-market launch. So this stuff is really helpful. I think if we always try to get the quantitative analysis to determine the what and rely on the qualitative to understand the why.
Yeah.
You combine those two to make for a pretty effective marketing launch, hopefully.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. The other thing that I should mention, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, but when we talked about building out segments, I always ask, with surveys like this, I always ask questions around demographics, right? So, age, geographical location, education level, income, that sort of thing. Because when it's all said and done, using statistics, you're going to want to identify, okay, for those that are likely to buy, what are their characteristics and how does that fall out from a segmentation standpoint? And then from there, you can say, okay, within the segments that I think I can appeal to, what messages are going to resonate, right? Based on their needs. The needs could be, needs around the function of the widget, whatever that might be, or emotional needs, based on wanting to be a part of a community or do the right thing for their family or, take care of their own health, whatever it may be. And then you can start to message around that by developing these personas that say, okay, here are the needs of this particular persona, right? This is the 25-year-old male living in the Midwest. What are their needs from the standpoint of, practicality or function, as well as, belonging and taking care of their health, et cetera. If you can key in on those things, you can build a persona around that person with messages that will resonate specifically with that person and an understanding of how to reach that person, right, with that message. So we want to take it to that level of detail. And that would be another example that I could have provided here. But that's the power of, being able to collect the data and then analyze it in such a way that, can get you really targeted from a marketing standpoint. Okay, enough about that. Let's jump into our fourth exercise then. Chad, how are we doing on time here? We've got about 15 minutes left. I think.
Yep. I think if we can, we've probably got 10, 12 minutes for the exercises, and then
Okay.
We'll just have a few points to wrap up before we get to 12:30 Central.
Okay. Since everybody's got the Miro board, I'm going to skip bringing that up and showing that on my screen. Let's just have everybody jump to Miro again. And again, go to the right. And this time we are going to talk about the quantitative part of our market research here. We're doing this. Chad and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, the best way to do this, exercise 4 first or 5 first. But we decided on what we show here, which is for the case study, what types of analysis do we think we want to do? So the answers could be things like segmentation or, ranking of features or, price sensitivity or what have you. Whatever those things are, we'll brainstorm that in just a minute. And then we're going to use that to design what the survey should look like. So we'll sort of jump from 4 to 5 here pretty rapidly. And Chad, I'll let you facilitate the 5th exercise. But for the 4th one, let's start with the types of analysis, statistical analysis that we're going to want to do. And then that will inform what the questions need to look like. And I'm going to participate in this one as well, because I've got some thoughts here also. Chad, my Post-its got really small for some reason.
Oh.
Never seen that happen before.
Mike, maybe for the recording, we should show the mural board.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point, Chad. Let me do that while you guys are brainstorming. All right, here we go. I'm going to start moving things into clusters here, so don't mind me. Let me know when you guys are done and we'll have a quick chat about this. All right, I don't see anybody else typing, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit. So I've just taken an attempt anyway at clustering what I've read. So I see one on size of the market. That's an interesting one. So, market sizing for the purpose of a business case, a couple of ways to get there. You can read the big secondary studies and, try to determine what the market size is, based on what those say. Or you can extrapolate market size by, basically using the sample size that we're talking about here, which is 2,000, and saying, okay, X% of the 2,000 that I spoke with indicated that they would buy within the next, 12 months, let's say, or maybe it was 24 months or 36 months or what have you. But you can start to extrapolate the number that way as well, in addition to whatever secondary study might be out there in terms of like historical, sales data and that kind of thing. But I wanted to make a point of that because it's a really good idea from a credibility standpoint to be able to say we've looked at it both ways, bottoms up and top down. And those two numbers are similar. It's an added piece of credibility for those that are going to be saying, yeah, we're going to prioritize this project and spend the money. And so anyway, so then I saw a cluster around the customer journey, which is great. What's influencing their decision, what's prompting them to even think about this, and then who are they conferring with, what do they consider to be valuable information, what do they want to buy, and that sort of thing. Another comment here, like in the last exercise about retailers and what are they likely to carry, that's a really key one. The one that you're highlighting, Chad, right now, where are they most successful? Do they know why? I wasn't sure what to do with that one, so I just kind of left it out on its own. Does anyone want to talk about that one just to explain kind of what the thought process was, or what that means exactly? If not, we'll keep moving here. We had kind of talked about the buyer segments. So I think I had written that one. What are the buyer segments? So we'll want to ask questions around that. And then there was one comment here by somebody else. Are senior citizens more likely to use the product versus Gen Xers? So, you can ask questions about age, right? And then correlate age, if there is a correlation, with likelihood to buy. That would be one of the stats, that we would want to look at is there a high correlation between somebody, in a certain age range, versus a high likelihood to buy. And you can correlate that. If it turns out that it's, a 0.95 positive correlation, then you'll know that, okay, there's, it's not causal necessarily, but there is a correlation between age and wanting to buy. So, you would know that and probably make decisions about who you're targeting based on that. We talked about price sensitivity and price points, across the segments. Again, these are valuable things that you can do with statistics, feature comparisons. That's another cluster. So, not just what are the features, but also, what are the most important features so that, maybe, back to the comment that was made earlier about MVP, what does MVP need to include? If the top 3 features are, pretty obvious, you might say, well, that's going to drive what we do with MVP. These are the 3 features that are most important from a product management standpoint for the purpose of MVP. And then we can add things later. But right now we know we need to have these 3 features. And then people with ongoing disease states like diabetes, are they more interested in the product versus, others, like people with high blood pressure? I think, that's great. These are questions that we can ask about, their current health condition, and then we can correlate the answers we get there versus likelihood to buy, price point, key messaging, and that sort of thing. So hopefully you're starting to see that you can go on forever with analysis of the data once you have it to really draw some great conclusions that should be used to inform the marketing strategy and how you're talking about things and that sort of thing. So with that, unless there are any other comments or insights that people would like to provide, we can move on to the last exercise. And Chad, I will let you take that one away.
Sure. So as you were talking through that, Mike, and I was looking at some of the analyses that people hypothesize that we would like to do, I started thinking through survey questions. And if you really are just sort of spinning things 90 degrees and turning them into questions and thinking about how you want to capture the data so that you can do that more robust analysis. So some things are really simple and basic, like what is your age or what is your annual income? But then there's other more complex questions like which of the following health conditions apply to you, and providing like a multiple choice question. And then on pricing, you might ask, you could do a Van Westendorp analysis where you're asking what price is like too cheap, which price is really expensive, which price is just about right. So to Julius's, I think comment earlier, like trying to find that price elasticity and what the right zone of pricing might be, there's some strategies there for asking the right questions. And then feature function analysis, like a ranking question, rank the importance of the following features. You could also do a comparison question. Which of these 2 features is more important to you, A versus B, and then B versus C, A versus C. So I think in the interest of time, we might not have time for everybody to put their ideas down here, but I wanted to just, seed people as they go out and know that these are the types of questions you start to dive into, right? Like some very specific questions with the end in mind. And I think I'm glad we sort of did it this way, Mike, in the end, like thinking about what goals do we have for this survey? What do we want to come out of it? What variables do we want to be able to compare and contrast? And the example you provided before we got into this was really important, like showing, hey, we'd like to do a demographic or we'd like to do a geographic analysis. So let's make sure we capture where they live, right? We want to do some price sensitivity. So let's make sure we're asking about that. So yeah, I would love to spend more time on this, but in the interest of people's time, since they've already, did a great job participating today. I just want to make sure
Yep.
we end close to on time, and we do have a couple more things to cover.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just wanted to make one more comment on survey design. So, this can go pretty quick, but what I would say is make sure you vet this with all the stakeholders before you make it, a live survey. And the reason I say that is because it really does, you don't get a second shot at it, right? I mean, it's got to be, I just had this conversation with a new client yesterday, and we were talking about how let's take our time. We need to take our time with the survey design. I'm going to come up with a draft, but then I want you guys to really think about, did we ask everything just right? Did we ask everything that we want to know, with all the back end analysis in mind? The other thing that I would say is that it's really helpful to use as many five answer scale questions as possible. It just makes the analysis way easier, and it allows you to define each of the numbers, right? 1 means not at all interested, 2 means, somewhat interested, 3 means interested, and so you're able to define the scale, and also you're able to compare, when you go to correlate and that sort of thing. If everything's on a 5 answer scale, it just makes the comparison, the stats, way easier than what would otherwise be the case. Now, that's not always possible. There will be situations where you have to use a different scale. For example, if you have 10 features and you want people to rank and rate them, then you're not going to wind up with a 5-point scale. But wherever you can use it, because it just makes this much, much easier on the back end. So with that, Chad, I will switch screens, and we'll get back to the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Just a couple closing remarks. Mike gets that up.
Yep. Is it not? Okay, here we go. I'm having trouble getting this to go into presentation mode for some reason. I'm not sure why, but go ahead, Chad.
It's showing presentation mode for me, but I'm showing it shows the slide that says exercise 4.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yep, there we go.
There you go. Great. Well, first, just thank you for everybody for participating today and making this interactive and educational. I know I learned something from everybody that worked through these questions and exercises. We covered quite a bit, so we just thought we'd wrap up with a few key thoughts to send you on your way. First, as Mike stated at the beginning, research is performed to help businesses reduce risk. There's always uncertainty, right? Every corner of the business has that, whether that's the customer satisfaction, customer service, competitive analysis, pricing, things like that. But research can be applied to each of those areas. And that's, I think, an important lesson that we should all take away. The second point is, we did touch on the difference briefly between primary and secondary and qualitative and quantitative. It's important to, I think, know the difference, like when it's best to use them. Primary, again, is best for getting some unique proprietary answers to questions. And then secondary is, just if you need to scan the market quickly to get the data that's already available. But again, primary research is really where your company is going to gain insights that really lead to competitive differentiation. And again, on that third point with primary research, we find that often doing the qualitative first makes sense to provide an initial sense of direction. And then the quantitative comes in and you get more detail and you have that rich analysis that we were just talking about. And then lastly, again, the whole point of research, besides reducing risks, is to inform decisions, to reduce uncertainty, and to make the business smarter and to help drive competitive advantage and differentiation. So all things that are probably pretty logical after we've been through this today, but wanted to just at least leave you with those points. Again, we hope you learned some good things today. One last thing we'll mention, if you want to move to that next slide, Mike, is we're planning another workshop for January. This was our third today, and we're planning a fourth one. That will be focused on resolving unanticipated challenges. So Mike and I, and I'm sure all of you, have experienced times when even the well-laid plans hit bumps in the road. So Mike and I intend to develop some content and exercises that will help business leaders work through those challenges and help get things back on track. So So mark your calendars for January 14th, and we'll expect to see some invitations for that coming out in December. So with that, I think that's all we have for today, unless anybody has a question they want to ask. You can certainly follow up with us after the fact. But thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day and the week.